Hey everybody, this is Vince from Untethered Audio, and today I'm going to go over just a complete getting started guide with our DL-1 plugin. Now, in the guide, I'm going to assume that you also have a DataLooper pedal, because that really is the best way to integrate with this plugin. But if you don't, it's still going to be helpful just to get an understanding of what the plugin does and how to get started with it. So let's start out just from the very beginning, and in this guide, I'm going to assume that you have very little previous knowledge of DAWs and Ableton. And I'm also going to make this guide Ableton specific for now, but do understand that a lot of these same concepts apply to any other DAW you'd want to use this plugin with. So Logic or Studio One or Reaper, all of those DAWs will work, but I'm just going to focus on Ableton at the moment, since I think most of the users are in that DAW. So from the very beginning here, let's just go over how to get the plugin installed. So I have the Untethered Audio website open, and I'm on the resources page, which is in this support dropdown. And you can download the DL-1 plugin directly from here. So if you've licensed it previously, the licenses will be saved on your computer. If you haven't licensed it, you can just download it here, and it'll install as a free trial. Now, if you do that, the free trial has a couple of limitations. One is that every once in a while it'll emit some intermittent noise, which I'm sorry, it's a terrible thing. And then the other thing is that currently it won't save the plugin settings. So if you have like a bunch of routings that you've done and you close the DAW and reopen it, those settings will be gone. That's something that we might change in the future trial version, but just for now, keep that in mind. So yeah, all you'll have to do to install the plugin is download this package. Inside there's zip files here. There will be an installer that will put the plugin in the correct plugins folder. And then when you open up your DAW, and in this case Ableton, it will scan the plugins folder and find the Untethered Audio DL-1. And so if you go over to the plugins folder here, we'll see that it's right here. And this will show up as an audio unit or a VST or a VST3. If you're in a DAW that supports clap, it'll also show up as a clap format. There is no Pro Tools AAX currently, and we don't have any plans to develop that in the future. There will shortly, if not already while you're watching this, be an iPad version that will be iOS compatible as well. Now, the first thing to understand is just a routing in Ableton and how to get audio into the DL-1 plugin. So what I'm going to do is just drop the plugin into this track. I've just created an audio track here. This top one is just for the voice that you're hearing right now. And this one is just going to be my kind of demo audio track. So in Ableton, to create a track, you can just right-click and click Insert Audio Track or just Command-T. And it's really, really important to understand what this little section does. So in auto and off are the track monitoring options. And if you're in mode, that means that audio will always go through this track. So it'll always allow audio to pass through. That's what I've got going on with this voice. If I turn it to auto, you didn't hear it for a second because the channel was not on record mode. So if I'm in record mode, then auto means that you will still hear it when I switch over to auto. It basically is saying that if it's in record, let the audio pass through. If it's in input, then don't let the audio pass through if it's not in record mode. So yeah, that's basically how that works. And that's super important to know as you're playing around with this plugin, because the biggest kind of starter complaint that I've gotten is just like, I don't know how to get sound into the plugin, you know? And so what we're gonna do is just leave this in mode for now, and we're gonna drop an instance of the plugin. So if you want to use an audio unit, you can just go into the audio units folder here. VSTs have the advantage of being both Mac and PC compatible. So if you do use a VST, you can share the set with someone who has a PC and it'll still work. So I'm going to go with an audio unit just because I'm a Mac person, and let's just drop that in and you'll see that the plugin interface shows up. So on this plugin interface, a couple of things. So for one, it's resizable. You can make it huge, which for an instruction video, I think I'm going to do. And you'll see that on the top left, there is a green USB icon. And you'll see when I hover over that, there's a tooltip that just says, it shows if there's a pedal connected. And so I've got a pedal connected right here, this my handy DataLooper pedal here. And if I disconnect that, that will turn gray. Now, it's really important to understand what the DataLooper pedal ecosystem is. So inside the settings here, you'll see there's this hardware looper number. And so within the DataLooper, you can have as many virtual loopers as you want. So this hardware looper number doesn't correspond to a single pedal. It corresponds to a virtual looper within a single pedal. So inside the default config for the DataLooper, it's set up as 9 loopers. And let me show you kind of the easiest way to understand that. So let's go back to the Untethered Audio website here. And we're going to go over to support and go to this DataLooper config. Now, this piece of software, which runs in Chrome, it allows you to connect to your DataLooper pedal, load up different configurations, and then send different configurations to the pedal. So I'm just going to go here into the package that was downloaded from the Untethered Audio site. And that basically, here's the structure for that. It has an installer for the Ableton remote script for Mac. It has the PC version of the remote script, which is just in this zip. It has the firmware files, which are these hex files, and then an updater that allows you to update the firmware, and then some resources, the template, and then the default config. So I'm going to open up this default config, and you'll see that when I click on a different button, it shows different commands that are assigned to that button. So let me go down to the bottom left, and what I'm seeing here is that this is saying on this button, what I want to have happen is when I press the button down, I want virtual looper number 1 to start recording. And I want virtual looper number 1 to record quantized, which means that it's going to latch to the grid of the DAW. So if Ableton's at 120 beats per minute, then this is going to make sure it sticks to that grid. And we can set how tightly it sticks to that grid from the DL-1 software. Now, the rest of these are additional commands that happen on different parts of the press. And you'll see that this same set of commands is replicated across the different columns. Now, the difference being that column 1, all of the commands are looper number 1. Column 2, all of the commands are looper number 2. And column 3, all of the commands are looper number 3. Now, this 4th column on the default config is reserved for basically special operations. So on the top right, you've got this long press that enters a new session mode, which we'll discuss a little bit later, and then also clears all the loopers. This one, when you press it, it'll stop and start all the loopers. And then this button changes from preset 1 to 2 and 3. Now, if I go to preset 2, you'll see that it's the same thing, except it's loopers 4 through 6, and preset 3 is loopers 7 through 9. Now, if we go back to preset 1, we can kind of see that configuration again. Yeah, basically, the other thing that's helpful to know here is that all of this is reconfigurable. So if you really don't like the way it's laid out, you can adjust all this. You can cut out, controls, add different controls, and yeah, it's really helpful for just making your own setup. I mean, generally as live loopers, we're people who put together all kinds of custom stuff, and this is kind of an extension of that. So yeah, basically that's how this works, and there's another video that breaks down all of the features of the default config, so check that out if you want some more information there. Now going back to Ableton, we're going to look at this hardware looper parameter, and this parameter is the one that links this DL1 instance to one of the virtual loopers on the pedal. So if we set this to hardware looper 1, then any control that is connected to looper number 1 will then talk to the DL1 plugin. So that's the same thing if we set it to 2 on the plugin, it'll talk to this number 2. And that's all remappable. You can move these buttons around anywhere you want. One thing to know about the config software is that currently it says Ableton commands. This also extends for these looper controls to the DL-1 plugin. So that's something that we should probably make more clear, but that's the situation for right now. So yeah, basically these virtual loopers correspond to that hardware looper number. So now that I've got this linked to 1, when I press play, I can see that my data looper is blinking in time with the Ableton clock. And so that's great. That's a really good starting point. And the next thing I can see is that if I press a button on the data looper, so here's my number 1, if I press that, it goes red. And then if I press this to clear, it clears. Now, that's basically the most straightforward, like, yeah, we're started, it's working now. Now, one thing to note, if I press record and you'll notice I just stopped the transport, it seems like nothing's happening. And that's because there's actually no motion on the transport. So it's actually recording here, but it won't play back or really do anything because this Ableton transport is not running. So it's really important to note that DL-1 is built with the DAW tempo integration kind of as part of the fundamental understanding of how tempo is working. So you always want to make sure that this transport is running and that the lights are blinking as you are recording loops. Now that doesn't mean that you can't define a new tempo, and there's a special mode for that that we're going to get to in a little bit. Before we do that though, I want to jump into, okay, now we know that the plugin works, we know that there is a connection to the pedal, but how do we link the pedal to some sound? I want to loop some sound. How do I make that happen and do that in a way that I can kind of record the set, everything feels like kind of the hardware looper ecosystem that I'm used to, but there's just more flexibility and I'm past all the technical hurdles. And so to do that, we're going to try and break down Ableton's routing system and really understand what that means. So we already went over this in, auto, and off track monitoring. The next thing that I want to go over is the inputs and outputs section. Now this might seem really basic, but you can actually do quite a bit in Ableton that you can't do in a lot of other DAWs that makes it really easy to do a really nice kind of grouped looping setup. And so the reason I think routing is important is because you don't always just want to link a single track of audio to a different looper. So let me give you an example. Let's say I am I'm a singer-songwriter and I've got an acoustic guitar and I've got a vocal and that's it basically. Well, on the loop pedal, I don't really want the voice to loop when I'm trying to loop an acoustic guitar, because if I'm not singing, it's just going to add noise to the loop. If I am singing, I don't necessarily want that singing to go into the loop either. Maybe I'm like singing while I'm playing a riff and I just want that riff to continue. That's great, but then I want looper 2 to just be the voice, and I want looper 3, just in case I want to record both the voice and the guitar at the same time, to be both of them at the same time. Well, so how do I do that without having a bunch of duplicated tracks and like making it really messy inside? So let's just recreate that as an example of how to kind of route a basic singer-songwriter setup. So let's just name this name this track guitar, and let's add another audio track, and we'll name this vocal. Okay, so first thing to do is these are going to be the tracks that the direct audio is coming into. So this guitar track, this is where I actually want the guitar to be routed to. So first off, I'm going to delete this DL-1 plugin instance because we're not there yet. And I'm just going to make sure that I've got the correct external input selected here. So yeah, let's just say 1 is guitar. I actually have it connected to a Fender Rhodes, but you know, for all intents and purposes, it works. And then let's go with the vocal being track number 5. I do have a vocal mic set up for track number 5. So yeah, so now we've got that, and basically you can see that my monitoring is enabled for the guitar. That means all the audio that's coming into this track will also go out, which is exemplified by I play the Rhodes, you hear the Rhodes. And you know, I'm actually going to change this because I want to record my set, meaning that I want to record the direct track that I am playing. So I'll change this to auto. You could leave it on in, it's kind of inconsequential. The difference is that if you're recording in auto, when you go to play back the file after the fact, after it's been recorded, it'll play back the recorded file, whereas in will just always be listening for the input. So I think auto is a better choice for this. And then on the vocal, we're going to do auto as well. And now you'll hear this other mic over here. So you'll probably notice that there was just this weird little thing that happened that I want to record both of these. What's going on? It's you know, not letting me do that. What the heck? Well, there's a couple of ways around that. You can hold Command down, and then that allows you to select both. Or you can right click, and then there's this pesky little ARM exclusive thing that turns itself on sometimes. And if you turn that off, then you don't have that problem. So yeah, that's one of those things that, like, you might just be scratching your head, you don't know what to search for, it's a pain in the ass. It's just that. ARM exclusive. It's really helpful sometimes as well. So yeah, now we've got these two tracks armed. That's great. So now we've got a guitar and a vocal. Okay, so where do I put the loopers? What's the deal? Like I know that I want to loop both these things, but like I kind of want to do it in a way where some of them I want on guitar. I can't just throw 3 loopers on the guitar track. How does this going to work? Well, so we have a couple options now. We can decide to do it with sends, where we create a bus that we can then send the audio to, or we can do it with groups. Now, in this instance, I'm going to show you how this works with sends. I think it's a pretty straightforward way to understand kind of the concept. So a send, which Ableton calls well, a return track, because it's a send and a return, you just create by right-clicking the master down here and click Insert Return Track. Now we've got this return track, and this is a special track. You'll see that now there's this little thing that just showed up right here that allows us to send audio from this track, or from any track, into this send. So what this allows us to do is say, okay, we want guitar and vocal. This is our guitar vocal bus. Guitar, vocal, right? That's great. That's, or you know what, let's actually even do it one better. Let's just call it looper number 1. So this is looper 1. We want to send the guitar and the vocal to looper number 1. Easy. Okay, let's just do looper number 2. So now looper number 2. And what do we want the looper number 2 to be? Let's just say we want looper number 2 to be the guitar. Now it's just the guitar. Now you see I didn't send any of the vocal there because I just want looper number 2 to loop the guitar. So great. And then let's do looper number 3. And this one we're going to do just the vocal. So I'll just send the vocal to looper number 3. Now a couple of things are happening now. So for one, now we have this really controllable kind of sub-mixer that allows us to say, okay, I want a little bit of this one in the looper, I want a little bit of that one in the looper, you know, and now you can specify exactly what you want in each looper. Now, when you do this, just understand that the loopers, the return track, the audio is going to go out of this. So by sending additional audio from the guitar to the return track, you're going to hear the guitar track a lot louder because the audio is going into this track, coming out of this track, going to the master, but then also coming out of this track, going into these different return tracks. And so now you've got this audio kind of replicated in all these places, which when you're just playing a set, you don't want that. You want it one source that you're listening to, one source of truth. So that's when the next set of options comes in that makes things really helpful. And so let's drop a DL-1 plugin here. And very important, pay attention to this. This is like one of the most fundamental things about the looper that you need to understand. So first, yeah, we need to link this. So we'll go hardware looper number 1. Now we know that's linked. The next thing is this audio through parameter. Now what this means is it's controlling our monitoring, basically. So when audio through, you can see it says input to output. So do we want the input to output to always be open? No, definitely not in this situation, because that means that we're getting whatever we're sending to this bus track duplicated. So we don't want that. Do we want it to be when recording? Well, what does that mean? So when recording means that as soon as we start recording, we're going to hear that audio through the return track, which no, we don't want that either, because that means we're still playing. So that means that when we're playing, then it gets a lot louder, which while we're looping. We don't want that. That doesn't make sense for this. When not playing, so that means basically anytime we're not recording or it's not playing, it's duplicated. No, we don't want that either. The one we want for this situation is never. Now, all these other options, they're here for a reason. There's definitely other situations where you would want these audio through options, but for most of the time, never is going to be the best choice unless you're putting things directly on a track. So we're just going to leave that on never here and make sure that we do that to the other ones here. So now what we've got is you'll see that audio is still going into the bus. We're still sending it here, but if you look at the meter, there's no audio coming out. So that means we've successfully negotiated our double monitoring situation. Let's do the same thing for these other guys here. So we're going to go here, we're going to link this to hardware looper 2, and then we're going to turn this to audio through never, and then the same thing on this guy. We're going to go through here, and we're going to go to hardware looper 3 and never. Great. So now you'll see that all of our monitoring just got cleaner. What the situation is now is that we can do looping on any track. So if I added another track here, and let's add a MIDI track and do some cheesy synth here. So if we go to instruments and we just add do a tension, intense. So let's say here now we put this on, we'll record this as well. Now we can do that. So now I can say, oh, you know what, I really want this tension instrument to be linked to looper number 1. Well, all we gotta do is now it's on looper number 1. And then if I just, remember, always play the transport, if I just play the transport and I'm just like, oh yeah, sweet, I love this pattern. You also heard that there was a little bit of vocal in that one, because looper number 1, remember, we send the vocal as well as this tension instrument. It's right here. So if we take that off, now I'm doing that same. Okay, great. So now we got, yeah, awesome. All right, but that successfully kind of like shows you the monitoring. Yeah, so now you notice that wasn't in time. That didn't really sound great when I made that loop. Now the reason for that, and the next thing that I want to get into, is quantization. So there's a lot of, just to recap on routing, there's a lot of different ways to route this looper. This send and return thing is just one option. And you're going to want to play around with what works best for your set. Before actually we jump into quantization, I want to give you one more option that I find really helpful, and that's grouping. Now, in the context of wanting to send the same instrument to different loopers, and then sending a second instrument to different loopers, so like in this context, the guitar, vocal, singer-songwriter thing, the send-return model works great. Because it allows you to do a mix for each looper. Well, that's not always how you want to route things. So the situation where I'm performing live, I like to separate out. I know I want vocals on one set of loopers, I want keyboards on one set of loopers, and I want guitars on another set of loopers. And so what that means is I want to have a single source be recorded on multiple loopers. But I don't ever want those. I don't ever want to have to like make a mix of those things. So let's just do that, and I'll show you what that looks like. So let's just delete these, and we're going to go back to the basics here. So or actually, we can use the tension in our example here. So now we're just back to no loopers, regular old set, and let's say I want to have 3 loopers for the guitar, because really like guitar loops. Well, each of those loopers then is going to have a track. So we're going to say looper 1, and then loop 2. And in fact, before I do this, I'm going to make this a little easier on myself. I'm just going to make one looper track, drag the plugin in here, set this the way I want it, and now when I duplicate it, most of the work's already done. Okay, so, but here's the thing. I don't want to have to take the same input from the guitar, because that means that any cool effects that I've got going on here, like what if I wanted to have some auto panning here? Well, if I now say, oh, this is also going to come from external input number 1, that means that it's never hitting this cool auto pan, and that means that when I loop, it's going to sound different, which I don't want that. Well, so what I could do is say, okay, I actually want to send, rather than taking this guitar and sending it to the master, I'm just going to send it to that looper. But then you have the problem of, well, now you can't hear it, you can't monitor it. So we're not going to do that either. We'll leave this back at master. What we're going to do here is we're going to go from selecting this input. We can actually select a track here. So we're just going to take the input from the guitar. And now the next thing that you want to understand is, well, at what point in the signal chain do we want to take this signal? We can do pre-effects, which probably we don't want to do because we like the effects. We can do post-effects, which means just right after the effects, or we can do post-mixer, which is going to take the volume of this thing into consideration. Most of the time, you're going to want to do post-mixer, because what you want is that when you loop it to sound basically exactly the same as the thing you just played. So we're going to take this post-mixer, and then I'm just going to set this to in, because I don't actually want to record the looper. And we'll get into that in a second. Once I create this, I'll kind of go there, and then we'll jump over to quantization. So yeah, here we go. So we got looper number 1 is going to be guitar. Looper number 2 is going to be vocal. I'll just change the name here. And looper number 3 is going to be that tension instrument. And the nice thing about this now is that we could say, okay, like we actually want looper 2 to be guitar as well, and then looper 3 is going to be vocal. Now, what you lose by having this situation is the ability to say, oh, I want looper 2 to be both guitar and vocal. I can't do a mix here that's specifically for these loopers. But what you gain is the flexibility of having basically multiple loopers dedicated to a single source. And it's really easy to see that. Whereas when it's you could do that with a send and return. But then you have to make sure, like, oh, okay, like, where's this sending to looper 1? So this is really easy to see, okay, this is routed to the guitar. And then the other thing that's really cool about this is I can say, well, you know what, I'm going to group these. This is going to be my, like, singer set. I can still, now this will automatically route the audio to that group. And I just did that by selecting the tracks I want and hitting Command G. And then I can actually say, like, oh, you know what? I actually want this one to be from the singer set group. So now I'm taking this from the entire group. And in this case, maybe I want this pre-effects, because I want to just take whatever signal is coming straight from this thing. You can kind of decide how you want here. But the grouping in conjunction with these separate tracks that house the loopers and then the audio through to none is a really great way to do things as well. So just keep that in mind. Let's talk about recording now. So let's say I want to have a whole looper set and I want to record everything so that I can just send that live set off to my audience. Well, what's the easiest way to do that? If it was a hardware looper, I would just take the output of the hardware looper, put it back into my mixer, record the direct signals, and then maybe I have some separate tracks of just like, this is the output of the looper, this is the output of the regular guitar signal, and then I've got just a couple tracks. Well, you can do that as well in this virtual domain, and it's actually pretty similar. So this is a really important concept to wrap your head around as well, because it's not totally intuitive, but it's that when I send the guitar signal over to this looper, and let's say I'm recording this looper right here, right? What's going to record is the input, just like when you record this guitar track, what will show up in the audio here is the guitar, not the guitar after it hits the auto pan. The same concept applies with the looper. So what we'll record here, if I recorded this, is what's going into the looper. Well, I don't really want that, because all that is just the guitar with effects on it. And then if I have automation being recorded, which you can do by clicking this button right here, this top button. This basically tells me that when I record the set, I also want to record the automation. So if I have that on, then it will also record the button presses of when record gets triggered and clear gets triggered and all that stuff gets triggered, which is great. That can be really great to have. But it's also kind of an annoying thing, because what that means is like, well, then if I play back from the beginning everything linearly, then it works great, you know? But if I don't play it back linearly, then I hit an automation point that says start record, but I just like jumped to it. It's not and it'll start the recording, but then it won't stop the recording until I hit the automation point that says stop recording, which means that you have to either play it back linearly from the point at which recording started, or I need to like manually do it, and it's also just annoying. So this is not a good way to do that. So I don't actually want to record these, because it's just going to bother me. When I go back and listen to this, it's going to be like, oh yeah, like it's now the automation triggered and the looper's now recording, but like, oh, if I don't just sit and wait. So you don't want to do that. There's a much better way. And let's think about this in the physical sense, where it's like I just have a hardware looper. I just want to record this. What am I going to do? I'm going to take the output of the looper and record it. And voila, you know, problem solved. Oh, how do you do that here? Well, same thing. You understand track routing in Ableton now, or in any DAW really for that matter. Let's just do that. So now we're going to have another track here, and this is going to be actually what we want from looper 1. So this is going to take looper 1, and in this case you might want it pre-effects, because maybe we have a bunch of crazy effects that are going on the looper, but we know that through experience, like, well, we're playing our live set, we get a little crazy. We don't always necessarily want all those crazy effects, you know. So we'll maybe do that pre-effects, and then this we don't ever really want to monitor. We don't really ever want to hear this going through. So we'll leave this on off, and we'll start recording this. And now we can just say this is, let's just say LP1 rec, you know, nice and easy. So, and we can color this different. And now we've got a recording of looper number 1's output. So great. So let's just do LP2 rec. Now we can just record looper number 2. And we'll just enable that. So now what we've got is this set that's like, cool, we can flexibly route these loopers wherever we want, and we can record it so that when we play it back, we've got this really nice, like, clean recording of what was coming out of the looper. Sweet, that's a great situation. There's one other little nicety that Ableton has that I really like, because I have extreme impatience, and so. First of all, congratulations, you made it like past 30 minutes of this video, so you must really want to learn this. But one thing that's really great is the resampling track. And so what that is a special track that resampling is after it hits the master. Basically, like, what you're hearing on the main output will then be resampled into the resampling track. And you can also record that as well. Now, you definitely don't want to monitor that, because you'll just get crazy feedback problems. So this is always 100% off. But here's the cool thing about that, is that now you have your whole set. So let's say I play my set, I'm recording it the whole way. This resampling track is recording as it sounds. It's recording the whole thing, the whole shebang, all the effects, all the everything. So at the end of it, let's just do a little recording, and then I'm talking, I got some stuff happening, I did a cool solo and melted people's faces, and you know, we're chilling now. So we did the thing, and now it's like, oh, sweet, there's a set. Now what's even cooler about this is I can just right click on this, say show in Finder, and I just played a 3-hour set. If I just wanted to export that 3-hour set in Ableton, you know, it'd take like an hour. but it's already been exported because it was recording the whole time. And so now here's the set. It's done. It's exported. This is the file. That's it. I can just now like, oh yeah, you're a fan, you're a taper, you want my set? Oh, great. Here you go. Let me email this to you. Let me convert it to MP3. So here, let's just one more little pro tip here. This little free piece of software has a terrible marketing team, but it's amazing. It's called Exact. You can do conversion from WAV to MP3. It's totally free. It's great. It's got little monsters. Yeah. So yeah, this now is essentially what the DataLooper default template is, except that's using the Ableton looper. So now here we go. We've got a great setup for the DL1 and everything. We kind of understand it all. We can change things around if we need to, and we're basically ready to go. Now, a couple little quirks and caveats. So at the moment, if you are switching from the Ableton looper setup to the DL1, a couple of things you should know. So the remote script, which you'll see here, and you might be familiar with, so let's say we have this control surface down here, there's a remote script. That and the DL1 do play nicely together, meaning that you can have, let's go back to this config here, you can say like, okay, I want to have this special Ableton control that's a transport control. I want to start the transport on this button. That's a special Ableton command. And then I want to do these DL1 things as well. You know, that's totally cool. Totally understand that. You can just leave things as they are with this control surface remote script installation. All good. But if you have those track names, those special track names, like this one, which if you're modifying the original template, those will be there. It sometimes will do some weird things where it tries to, where the remote script is like, oh, that's a looper, like let's do some stuff, you know, let's send some commands and like connect it to the pedal. But you don't actually want that because DL1 is under the hood handling all the communication. So just, it's counterintuitive because it's the opposite of what I've said for how to make the Ableton looper work. But yeah, just make sure it's not named the special naming convention. Now, if you have a track that you want to use the Ableton looper with, or you want to use a clip looper, you can still do that. Just don't put the DL1 on those tracks. Caveat number 2, and this is a PC user only thing. This is really annoying. You'll see that if you're trying to use the, well, I guess just to start, you cannot use the remote script and DL1 simultaneously on a PC. So if you wanted to have that situation where you're controlling the transport or some kind of special command in Ableton with the remote script and use DL1, you're kind of out of luck. Windows currently has a problem where only one MIDI device MIDI device can only talk to one application at a time. So basically, if it's already talking to Ableton, it can't talk to DL1. If it's already talking to DL1, it can't talk to Ableton. And so let me show you kind of what will happen there. So let's just say we have this DataLooper input right here. You'll see that I've got it track, remote, input and output, and control surface. Now, if this is my setup and I'm converting over to DL1 as a PC user, and I just open up Ableton and then I open up DL1, what I'm going to notice is that this does not go green for me. And if I unplug the DataLooper and plug it back in, this will go green, but then in here, this will go orange. And it'll say like, no, we can't see that, we can't talk to that. So you have to decide which one's more important. And if you ultimately decide that the DL1 plugin is more important, the way that you can make it work just right out the gate without having to do any weird unplugging and replugging is just make sure that all of this stuff for DataLooper input and output, track, remote, input, output, control surface, and then again for both the input here and the output down here is turned off. If none of that is checked and none of that is present here, Ableton won't try to talk to that device. It'll just basically say like, all right, clearly we're not linking to that device. Don't do anything with it. Don't try and open that port. And then the DL1 will just work without having to deal with that. So yeah, little quirk, caveat. The other quirk is that the transport has to be running. So those are kind of the three things. Other than that, everything should just work great. If you have any problems, you can always email us a bug report where we try to fix things as fast as we can. So yeah, now you have an overview of recording, routing, and just kind of general operation. Let's go into quantization, tempo, and kind of like what does that all mean? How does that all work? So one kind of important concept to understand in the world of software looping is that the DAW has, and DAW's digital audio workstation, so it's Ableton here, it has its own conception of tempo, and it has its own conception of time and grid. Normally, a hardware looper just determines tempo and grid based on the loop. All that exists in the hardware looper world is the loop. Now, when you enter this DAW world, you've got like backing tracks, additional stems, and tempo-based effects like echoes and stuff. It's ultimately way more awesome because everything is time-linked, but it ultimately is like a little bit more to wrap your head around. And you have to determine whether or not you are subject to the DAW's tempo being the master, or if you want to be the master and you want to determine the tempo yourself. So we're going to go over both scenarios, and yeah, generally I like to be the sub in the relationship with the DAW, where the DAW is determining the tempo for me. I'm playing along with some beat. I just know that like it's always going to lock in. I can't screw up. Basically, if my foot is a little bit slower than what I'm playing, it's not going to be wonky. It's going to work. I like that approach because it's really tricky to get an exact start and stop. And we have some things in the plugin that help with that. But even still, I'm a perfectionist and I don't like having little extras. So yeah, that's the default way that the DataLooper or the DL-1 and DataLooper work. They are by default linked to the DAW's tempo. So if I then play and I have the click track on, that click track is going to be what the looper latches to. Now, the next thing I need to understand is like, okay, well, so when does the looper latch? You know, does it loop on every quarter note? Does it latch to the 8th note? Does it latch to the 16th note? How tight to that grid do I want to be subjected? And that's what this setting here, quantize, is all about. How tight to snap to grid. Now, I've got it set to a kind of ridiculously high 4 bars. Probably you'll never want that. My default is quarter note, but what 4 bars means is basically nothing will happen when you trigger an action until you hit the 4 bar mark and every subsequent 4 bar mark. So like if I play the transport and I just press record, I just pressed record, nothing's happening. There's that's probably something we should put in the UI, some blinky thing that says the action's triggered. Oh wait, there it goes. Okay, sweet. It's not broken, it just has a long quantization. So yeah, basically if we set that now to quarter note, it's going to snap to the quarter note. If we set it to free, it won't snap to anything. I can just do like an ambient wah, 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 wah loop and it'll just do its own time. Now, generally, I like this to be quarter note. We'll turn that off because it's terrible. And that means that then anything I record with this will always latch the tempo. So let's just give this the example of, you know, I'll just do a thing real quick. So let's say we've got this guitar track, that's this Rhodes. We know looper 1 is Rhodes. I've got my DataLooper pedal. We previously linked it up. It's blinking. I know it's good. I'm going to put the DataLooper next to the Rhodes. Turn that metronome on. Okay, and let's see what's going on here. Let's pull this open so you can see what's happening. Okay, and then we're going to check our settings. We've got quantize, hardware looper. Our audio through is still correct. And then yeah, let's just try a thing. So let's say I'm going to play. And there we go. We got a loop. So yeah, that's basically what that does. And I don't know if you heard the button press, but I hit it before the downbeat. So that means basically I cued the action. I said record on the next downbeat. And then once the downbeat hit, it started recording. Now I've trained myself to do that because the Ableton looper only had the option of hitting before. But the DL-1 has now an option to, it detects whether or not you pressed the button just after that quantize mark. And if it's like within 300 milliseconds, it'll actually snap back because it's always listening. It's just like the government. All right, so let's see how that works. So let's go back to this click, and then I'm gonna hit it right on a downbeat, and it should also just do the same thing. Okay, yeah, same thing. So let's turn this off because it's terrible. And yeah, that's one actually advantage of using the plugin. If you did that on the Ableton looper, it would wait until that next quarter note to record, and you'd be like, I have to train my foot to hit it on the 32nd note before the downbeat, otherwise it just doesn't work, and it's annoying, and it took me a while to get that. So yeah, that's basically how the snapping to the DAWs tempo, that's being the sub in the relationship. And so yeah, let's say I want to be the master. I want to determine the tempo here. Well, that's also totally possible. Now the way to do that is via Ableton Link. So you have to make sure Ableton Link is turned on right here. And once Ableton Link is turned on, the DL-1 plugin under the hood will talk to Link and say, hey, change the tempo. I just calculated that it's now this, and I want you to change the tempo. So one kind of cool thing about the pedal integration is that you don't have to have Link on the whole time. Now you might remember that in this settings page there is this long press change mode to new session mode. Well, what is new session mode? Nope, sorry. New session mode is the I want to define the tempo and be the relationship master here. And so if I hold down that button, let me get my pedal here, you'll see that now all of the lights are purple and it says master on the screen. And you'll also notice that this now says master and slave, and up here it says one link. So cool, that means that we didn't have to have Ableton Link on the whole time because it does take a little bit of CPU, but we can now get it out of master mode. That link turns off, and that CPU resource isn't happening, or we can turn it back on, and now we're able to define the tempo again. So let's do that. Let's just say, okay, I'm not listening to a click track. Don't want to have to deal with that. Let's just make a thing now. Let's see how it did. It's pretty good for my imperfect time. Now, one thing to note is that if we are listening to the Ableton metronome, it's not going to stop when we want to define a new tempo. So let's say we go into master mode. What that means is that now we've got this annoying situation where it's like we definitely want to define a new tempo, but we have to hear this existing tempo. And so most of the time I like listening to a click track because after the loops are defined, I just want to make sure there's something that I can go back to that's like, this is the grid that we're on. But the way around that is this intelligent metronome that we put in here. So what that basically says is intelligent metronome stops when recording new tempo. That means that basically it will turn off when you get into master mode. So let's just turn master mode off. We're still running here. We got this thing on. And then we go into master mode, it turns off. Get out of master mode, it turns on. So that gives you kind of a workaround. Now, another thing that you might want to do, if you're recording the set and you're recording the outputs, You might just want to have a dummy DL1 instance. They all talk to each other. So let's say this is our dummy DL1 instance. We can just have the metronome on this track, and then we'll just name this metronome. I'll just say metro. Now this is our metronome. I'm just going to mute that. But that basically will turn off and on as you enter and exit new session mode. So that's how that definition works. The cool thing about Link is that you can have all these different computers on a network, and even an iPad with some apps and stuff, and the tempo will just redefine for everyone when you do your loop. So basically what will happen is you can have this band that's got like all their echoes and everything all controlled by plugins, and you do a new song that's totally improvisational at a tempo that you want to determine on the fly, and everything will be synchronized. So it's like totally mind-blowing, and can just have this cohesive future music experience and still have improvisation. So I think it's super cool. It took some time and effort to make that. So that is the quantization kind of overview. I hope that all makes sense. And I think this is probably a good place to pause for now. Just to recap, we've gone over just totally getting started. We've gone over track routing and understanding how to get audio in the plugin. We've gone over recording. We've gone over a couple little quirks, and we've gone over quantization and how time and tempo works. With that, I think I'm going to end this tutorial video, and yeah, just drop a comment if there's something else that you want to see, understand. There's a lot more coming. We've got some great beta testers that just jumped on the Untethered crew, and more software in the works. So yeah, thank you all so much, and enjoy the Data Looper.